I've been thinking about for a long time. The podcast industry has a privacy problem, specifically when it comes to ads.
Okay.
Just like on the web. In fact, it's exactly like what happened on the web, and I'm shocked that we're repeating this bit of history so soon, but we are. What the podcast industry wants to do and is doing at some level is they want to be able to track the people who listen to the podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
When there's an advertiser in that show. And then they also track the people that visit the advertiser's site or app or whatever it is that's being promoted. And then they want to relate those two together so that they know if the ad was successful at driving traffic without having to rely on a coupon code or a businessbrain.show/whatever URL. Yep, exactly. And we had this conversation on the web 20 plus years ago where we had the same problem with banner ads. People were obsessed with clicks. And it's like, yeah, but if somebody sees your ad, they might still buy your product.
Right.
And Ziff Davis came to me one day, 22 years ago on the web.
Are they still around?
I don't
Davis?
know.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Yeah. But I know what the most valuable asset on their balance sheet was the day that they sold off their assets if they're not still around. And it was the data they collected.
Yeah.
Because they came to me and they said, hey, we know you have this problem. People are obsessed with clicks. You know that not everybody that buys click through from your website. You want credit for that. We have a solution. They explain the same thing. We're going to put a pixel on the sponsor's website that captures user agent, the type, browser type and version, essentially.
Yeah.
And IP address. And we want to put the same thing on your website. This, again, pre-podcasting 20 years ago. Want to put the same thing on your website, captures user agent and IP address. And then we'll put those in a database and we'll relate them to each other. And when we see that user A wound up, visiting your website and maybe 4 others, and then bought from this sponsor, we know to give all 5 of you credit for that, partial credit anyway, for that purchase.
Yeah, sure.
And it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Where I should have asked questions, Shannon, was when they followed that up and said, we want you to put this pixel on your website for all of your users, and for every 1,000 users that visit, so cost per 1,000, CPM, M being meal, the French word for 1,000, cost per 1,000, CPM, we're going to pay you $1. And it was like, whoa, like we were selling ads for $14. So it was like, well, that now like $1, that makes a big difference. And we get to do it for the whole website. That's amazing. I don't know why I didn't ask why. Because if I had, I would have known exactly why. Because they were data farming is what they were doing. Yeah.
Right. That's right.
And then we wound up 15 years later with GDPR and CCPA and all of the privacy things because
where you have to, don't sell my data, don't tell,
it turns out that we humans, not you and me and certainly not our listeners, but humanity in general becomes irresponsible when we have access to this kind of data.
Yes,
it's just how it be. Right. Yep. If not the person collecting it, certainly the person to whom they eventually wind up selling it.
Yep.
And literally the same quarter that GDPR and CCPA were coming into like their own on the web was when the podcast industry, people, startups in the podcast industry said, hey, we have an idea. And they called me and it was the same conversation, except this time I'd had 2 decades of history. And I was like, you know that this is a bad idea, right? Like
right.
bad.
You see where this leads to, right? Yeah.
We've already seen it. Like it's right here. And so we've said no on this show, on the other 2 shows that I do. And we're not alone. Lots of podcasters have said no because at Mac Observer, I calculated it. I sold the data of over 4 million people.
Yeah. And it wasn't. And they sell it, even though it's kind of anonymized at some point, they triangulate it. Yeah, ish.
That's the problem is they can triangulate.
They sell it somewhere else, and they go, oh, we can take that data, match it with this data, and they get a lot of private, they find out
suddenly
stuff that
they
we're
know.
not happy
Like
with.
if you go to a sponsor's website and buy a product, they have your name, your email address, your address, maybe your birth date, and they tie that to your IP. And now it's like, oh, that person listens to Business Brain, or that person listens to, I don't know if there's a podcast called Bipolar Daily or whatever, but let's say there is. I don't want to be the one that like outs your health issues. That's
Absolutely.
not yet I got 4 million people on the planet to whom I've already done that. I'm going to go ahead and cap it there. So we haven't done this. However, the temptation grows because more and more sponsors are pushing to use these pixels because it's like, wow, I can. And there's a couple of reasons sponsors might want to use the pixel. The one, and certainly let's just jump to the extreme. One is that they actually want all the creepy data. Yep. Okay, well, I'm not going to help you because I don't agree with you getting all the creepy data. However, other sponsors are just like, hey, we just want to use it to confirm delivery.
That's right.
And that's totally fine. You talked about
the ad and the conversion, right? To see if the ad is any valuable or is that too much?
Yeah, it's hard to do conversions and track it directly to the ad without putting the person in the middle.
Okay,
right?
I see.
But you can still track like the total number of conversions, and you can interpolate and that sort of thing. And so I started thinking about this, and I've been thinking about this for a while. And I talked to people at Podcast Movement this week because, of course, it comes up, and they're like, "Do you think you'll ever accept pixels?" And I'm like, "Not until they're private pixels." And as soon as I said those words, private pixel, to someone, I was like, that's a nice term. I like that term. Could we create such a thing? Is there such a thing? And Shannon, on Wednesday night,
now there is.
in my hotel room at Podcast Movement, I sat down with a blank piece of screen and I coded up the BackBeat Media private pixel, and it works.
How does it work? Tell us.
So, well, I want to explain how it's implemented first, because I think this is the most important part. I wanted to create this in a way that I could give it to podcasters to use for free. I don't want to make money from this.
Okay.
I certainly don't want to collect people's data from this. Right. But I want people to be able to use it with as little friction as possible. And I want it to be implementable by the podcaster. I don't want
non-technical type of.
Well, it might be a little technical-ish, but I don't want them to have to rely on the sponsor to say, "Hey, we support the BackBeat Media private pixel." I want to put the power in the hands of the podcaster, where the podcaster says to the sponsor, "We use the BackBeat Media private pixel. So if you're okay with that." And what that means and what it doesn't mean, then great, I can put your pixel in as well. And really, there's no pixels in podcasting because it's not on the web, but it's redirects on your feed. So what happens now if an advertiser wants to track your listeners is they give you a part of a URL that goes at the beginning of your downloadable file. So in our feed, we put the link to the audio file that you're hearing right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. They tell you, put a little redirect at the front of that so that it goes through the sponsor's server or some data collector's server first. And then it immediately redirects to whatever your download link is, right? But that redirect allows them to capture that data. And so I started thinking, well, what if I jump in front of that? And instead of redirecting, because as soon as I redirect, like if, let's say, and you could put multiple redirects on a show, like if you have a tracker and I have a tracker, and then there's the data file, I could have it go to your tracker and have your tracker redirect to my tracker, and then my tracker redirect to the data file, and we both get the data in theory. And so I was like, well, I can't put a redirect in front, because if I put a redirect in front, I'm still passing the person along to you. I need to be the proxy, and I've built it. And it works. But I know people are going to say, well, we want IP address so that we know it's unique, because otherwise, if all we see is the IP address of Dave's proxy server,
we don't
know. And I was like, okay, let me solve that problem. So what I do in our little engine is I see the IP address. We don't log it anywhere, but I see it in the session, right? Sure. And so I take the IP address and I do a hash on it, which is essentially a one-way encryption on this. So it creates a unique ID, and it can't be reverse engineered. I know some hashes can be reverse engineered, folks. This one can't, because it uses a salt. And if you know the nerd stuff, then that makes sense to you. Right. So it's a one-way thing. And I pass that along I also pass the user agent along. So if you're using Apple Podcasts, they know you're using Apple Podcasts.
Cool.
If you're using, YouTube Podcasts, they know you're using YouTube or Android or whatever. That gets passed along. And then what I also get is I know, because I can see the script can see your IP address that's running. And so the script can go and grab geo data, like
got it.
Country and in the U.S., state, city, but regional data, so that people can say, all right, well, I'm targeting someone in the Boston metro area or the San Francisco metro area. Yeah. And I pass all of that along in headers to them. So they get all the things that they say they would need from the IP address, a unique ID,
but they don't
location
get the
data,
IP.
But they don't get the IP.
Yeah.
And they get the user agent, so they're able to see, okay, this is an Apple user, this is an Overcast user, this is Downcast, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And
that's cool.
I have it working. I'm telling you folks this because A, I'm super excited and proud of what I built, and B, we're using it for this show to test. So I guess if you don't hear this, it means my engine broke and kept you from downloading it. But I don't think my engine's going to break. Yep, I've been testing it on other things for about a week here. Well, almost a week. Yeah,
that's awesome. I love it. So hopefully it would become a standard that the podcasters could use, and to protect the privacy of the listeners and allow the advertiser to have enough information to where they could confirm the ads are being shown or talked about, that we are, this much traffic is coming in from these sources and target.
And here's
something.
Who it is.
Yeah,
in an anonymized way.
Yes. Yeah, that's cool.
Here's where these people are from, which is really all you're going to get from IP address anyway.
Yeah.
And now. And what I love is we'll set this up. We already have it set up, as you can see. Don't start. You can look at our feed and see that I have like pp-cf.bbm.fm at the beginning, because that's the URL I'm using for the engine. Don't use that for your own engine yet, because you'll see it'll fail. I've whitelisted certain podcasts from being allowed, because I need to make sure the whole industry doesn't just like grab my engine and crater it. Yeah. So that's
cool. That's awesome.